Well, we continue with the broadcast this morning, and it's time now to take a look at the declaration of the state of disaster by President Cyril Ramaphosa at the State of the Nation address. And Solidarity, the union, held a media conference serving court papers dealing with a litigation about this declaration of the state of disaster by the president over the electricity crisis. And we're going across to be joined by the head of communications at Solidarity, Dr. Morné Malan. Dr. Malan, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yes, interesting that you are now embarking on this action of serving court papers, declaring the state of disaster as unlawful. And just to understand the wisdom, your thinking behind serving these court papers, and one of the key issues here is the issue of definition on defining whether, in the true sense of the word, this electricity crisis is a state of disaster.
Yes, I think an important point of departure is just to remember that a state of disaster is almost by definition a legal instrument which has as its goal to revoke the rights of citizens, and in doing so to grant extraordinary powers to government in order to implement, in order to react to a specific disaster which has occurred. In this case, the disaster under question, or the crisis being discussed, is one of government failure. It is one that was caused by the government itself, and therefore you cannot impose upon a government which has already been found to be delinquent by virtue of the fact that they couldn't do their jobs. You cannot say that the reward for that is even less oversight, even less checks and balances, and even more power in the hands of those who have clearly been shown to be lacking in that regard. So no, this does not fall within the definition of a disaster as intended by the Disaster Management Act. And even if it did, it's quite clear that there are ample legislative and contingency arrangements which can be put in place without having to call a state of disaster. And in both these cases, it renders the state of disaster, which was declared last week, unlawful.
Well, Dr. Malan, so what you are saying is the state of disaster is called for by those who created the disaster in the first place. And this is essentially what you are saying, that disaster legislation is not meant for government failure.
Exactly. And when you look at it from a broader perspective, the precedent which something like this could set is that, once we've established that government failure qualifies as a disaster, we can move into something like a disasterocracy, something where South Africa is hardly ever outside of a state of disaster. We can see how various other issues, various other government failures, failure to provide water, failure to provide infrastructure, sewage, all those sorts of things can be declared as disasters, and we can have a permanent state of disaster where there's no parliamentary oversight, and where the exact people who flouted all of these rules when they flouted all the checks and balances when they created the crisis now have removed those. And I mean, the fact of the matter is we don't have a short memory. We can remember all of the abuses that took place during COVID-19, both in terms of the abuses of power, but also in terms of the corruption, the looting, the plundering of state funds, which took place both during the COVID-19 crisis as well as during the KwaZulu-Natal floods.
Well, considering the bitter lessons from COVID-19 and the state of disaster and the bitter lessons that we have had to actually learn, the stark reality is actually facing us that, is this now the sign of things to come where we have the state of disaster being declared? And despite the assurance that the president tried to give during his SONA address that there will be oversight, and he made mention of the Auditor General, how confident are we, in view of the track record in managing a state of disaster by the government goes?
No, there's absolutely nothing. If anybody has confidence that government will manage this state of disaster well, then I have absolutely no idea on what they base that, because government has shown itself historically to be incredibly inept in fulfilling their mandates, and also inordinately corrupt whenever they get a chance. So surely then the solution can't be to remove the guardrails and to have them just have a blank check. And that's part of the issue. Is the fact of the matter is the fact that the state of disaster has been declared for almost a week now, and we've not received any regulations. We've not received anything which, in some way, gives content to the state of disaster itself. All we know is that we are in a state of disaster, but it has no clear purpose at the moment. At the moment, it's completely undefined, and it's actually, in its current version, it's a blank check to government to now do whatever they want, because there are absolutely no rules. There's no basis upon which we can say, okay, the state of disaster was called in order for them to achieve these goals or in order to facilitate these sorts of actions. There's just absolutely nothing. So at the moment, government can do whatever they want, and there's very little oversight, very little checks and balances in terms of their power.
Well, exactly the point you make, Dr. Malan, in terms of regulations, because by now, after the announcement, we would have seen something we've seen during the COVID time. Regulations were like on a daily basis, and many of them actually fell short. Many of them actually were challenged. Many of these were actually taken to court. So, yeah, again, it is a sign of the government declaring the state of disaster, not knowing what the regulations are that are going to govern the state of disaster.
Exactly, and it's important. On the one hand, nobody wants bad regulations, but at least if you have bad regulations, then you know what you're fighting. You know what government is attempting to do, and you can evaluate whether this is a proper instrument. You can assess the risks. You can look at what possible advantages, whether there were other means by which to achieve the intended goals, but at the moment we have absolutely no idea. So in a certain sense, the status quo is even worse than the COVID-19 pandemic, because we have absolutely nothing to go on at the moment. At least during the COVID-19 period, like you said, we received regulations on a regular basis. And we knew that we do have the opportunity to go to court to attack specific regulations where needed. But in this case, we just know that there's a state of disaster, and it seems like government is happy simply not to have to report to Parliament in terms of their actions. And that's entirely unacceptable. Like I said, we can't move into a situation where government actually sees the very political and legal structures which form the basis of a constitutional democracy as the hindrances to their plans. That we can't say that the only way in which the ANC can fulfill its mandate is if it's given sort of quasi dictatorial totalitarian powers where they don't have to report to anybody. That surely cannot be the argument from government side.
Yes, and that's finally, now that you've served these court papers, process-wise, where to from here?
So we are scheduled to appear in the Pretoria High Court on the 14th of March. So we are very much looking forward to that period, and hopefully by then we'll also have certain regulations to also evaluate the case. But we are very confident that the state of disaster in and of itself is irrational, is reckless, and is entirely unjustifiable given the present situation.
And also, we will know who will be managing it, because we don't know with the cabinet reshuffle whether Dr. Dlamini Zuma is going to manage this entire process. But that's have to be seen. Dr. Morné Malan, thank you very much for your time with us this morning for the update. All the best to you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Morné Malan, the head of communications at Solidarity, serving papers dealing with the state of disaster over the electricity crisis. A quick break, we'll be back.